today. Doing a brake job, front brakes on the 96 Civic. Our pads are worn down to practically nothing, so time to replace them. I'm going to get started by jacking up the car, putting them up on jacks, the front end of it up on jack stands, taking the front wheels and tires off, and pulling the old pads out. We're also replacing the front rotors. Not that they are terribly bad shape, but it's a good idea, I think. I didn't replace them last time. They could probably be turned and be just fine, but rotors on these cars are really inexpensive. So, gonna do that. I always like to loosen the lug nuts before you get the wheel up off the ground. Just crack them loose. I jacked the front of the car up on the 4-inch long reinforced jack points just on the side skirts attached to the subframe. Lug nuts, 19mm. Sitting the jack stands underneath the lower control arm mounting bracket that mounts the subframe. Here's where its jack point. Setting the jacks in the cradle. You can see that. It supports the front end up off the car. Or up off the ground, rather. Once the lug nuts are off, sometimes a little difficult to get that wheel off. It's been on there so long. It likes to grab on, so you may have to manhandle that wheel just to get it off the hub. This hub wasn't too bad. The other one I had to use my foot against the wheel pretty hard, kick it a few times to get it to come off. $12mm on the lower bolt for the brake caliper. Needs to be loosened. And taken out. This one I broke the last time. Getting it out and had to drill it out.
I shot out the broken bolt, still attached to the extractor bit after it was backed out.
Once that's out, you can swing the brake caliper up. You've got your brake line still connected. Just use a bungee cord to hold it up out of the way. Usually wrap it up around the strut spring. You don't want it to hang by the brake line. Take it off. Now you should have access to your brake pads. Now this was the one that was squealing. Just this back brake pad. See the meeting up with the pad where it meets the rotor. Pads have retaining clips. Help keep the pads from shimming around. These don't seem so bad. You'll notice that you'll need to replace these in the event that your brake pads start wearing unevenly. These pads don't seem to be about the same amount of wear straight across. Pads are off on the other side. Time to do the driver's side. Up and out of the way. Outside pad. It's pretty low. Inside pad. You can tell on this side the clips are worn out. On this side, I think the pads are unevenly worn. particular. Yeah, this is the rear one. I'm sorry, on the inside pad, you can tell slightly more depth down here on the bottom than there is at the top. It's an indication that those clips are worn out. So I'll need to replace these. And they come in a kit. 17mm socket on this bolt and that bolt. Already had pulled the caliper off, slide it off of this, and tied it up back behind there. You can see it hanging back there by the bungee cord. Taking the load off of that brake line. Yeah, and you can see my CV boot's completely gone. I'll be replacing both drive axles here soon. I should mention here that these rotor screws here and here can sometimes be really quite difficult to get out of there without stripping them. They've been on there a long time. They've gotten pretty hot, rusted in place. If you don't have an impact tool of some type, you can just take a hammer and kind of a blunt object up against there, or even a screwdriver. Maybe choose a screwdriver you don't care too much about, like some cheapo screwdriver that put on there, whack it on the end just to break up the rust back behind it, and hopefully you get it loosened up enough so you can get it out of there. The other side, I got those two out finally. I ended up using a drill bit. If you have a drill that has, a type of hammering action or impact action, be probably your best bet. Off. And since I have the rotor screws out, it should come off. Maybe not as easy as just falling right off, but I have to bang on it a little bit. Very careful not to get those studs. Finally broke it loose. I had to get it from the other back side of it. Shouldn't have hit it where the pads make contact, but since I'm replacing the rotors, I figure probably not so bad. These have been holding up. It rusts up pretty good right around in there. Contact back behind here. The rotors aren't terribly shaped, in terrible shape. They'd probably be turned and reused. If you can see that, there's like a lip on the edge where it's ground down. Pretty sharp edge. But overall, these rotors could have lasted a little bit while longer, but they're pretty cheap. But maybe something local. Just get it done. So I'll get the new rotors. Got the caliper up out of the way, tied up to the strut, spring, making sure there's no real stress on that brake line right there. So far I haven't had to break that, or take that brake line loose up there to have to need to bleed the brakes. But since I am getting new pads, this piston right here will need to be recessed up into the housing. I'll use a clamp to do that. When you do that, make sure that you open up your master cylinder reservoir up in the underneath the hood. When you press that back in, it's going to feed the brake fluid back up into the reservoir. You don't want it to or build up the pressure up there, I guess, or overflows. You just got to be mindful of that. Be able to counter that. But that's it for now. I'm going to get what I need, come back, finish up the job. And I've gone ahead and picked up both brake rotors. Painted the hub sides, both on this side and the other sides, to help, I don't know, try to prevent some rusting as best I can. But nothing special. Black spray paint. Those are the new brake pads going on in just a few moments. So let's get them put on. Okay, one rotor's on. Still working on the caliper. And I was going to point out that I used some of this anti-seize stuff on these two screws, putting them back in. That way maybe next time around, if there is a next time around, it might be a little bit easier getting those screws out. Anyway, now I'm going to use my big old C-clamp and get this caliper piston pushed back in a little bit. I do have the master cylinder reservoir opened up to accommodate any kind of fluctuation in fluid levels, or at least be prepared for it. Alright, I'm going to do that. Okay. Got the C-clamp on the caliper piston head, and should say you probably want to put a piece of scrap wood in there, cross over that entire surface of that piston, and as you turn, the crank presses up against the back side of the body of the piston housing, and of course it presses that lip there, the piston, back into the body, so you can get it over the brake pads, the new brake pads, once they go in. So get that compressed down in and put the caliper back on. Piston is fully recessed into the housing. Next I'm going to put some fresh caliper grease brush on caliper grease, braking caliper grease on this surface, as well as the lower bolt that goes both through here and here, and then I'll be able to put the caliper back on once I get the new pads on. So shouldn't take too terribly much. Okay, got that top post greased up and the caliper back on, the boot set back over the end of that ridge for that joint. So now that I've got the caliper back up and just held up by the bungee cord, next step is to put the pads in and finish it up. Time for brake shoes. The brake shoe that has this piece here, which is I guess it notifies you whenever this brake pad has worn down enough. As soon as the pad meets the end of the piece of metal there, it will start to grind against the rotor, and it will make that noise you heard at the beginning of the video. Anyway, this side of it, or this particular shoe or pad, goes on the back side of the rotor, facing down. As this goes on, these clips, you'll need to put some caliper grease on there, so as well as on the surface where the piston will be meeting, not on this one, but I'm sorry, yes, on this one. So basically, get a little bit of grease here where the piston will be pressing up against the back of it. And then this one, as it sits up against the rotor, you'll want some grease here and here as well. And maybe even some on these, where these contacts are. It's about in this area. Generally what I'll do.
Once the pads are on and lubricated, the caliper is slid back over the new pads and bolted back down to the caliper bracket, and everything's checked and inspected to make sure everything's fitting, and the wheels and tires put back on the car.
Alright, everything's back together. It's been a few days running on the new rotors and pads. I just removed the wheel and inspected just to make sure there wasn't any gouging or contamination in the pads from any of the grease or brake fluid that might have got out. Or everything looked okay. The master cylinder seems to have equalized as well. There doesn't seem to be any loss of fluids there, so I think we're good. Till next time, if there is a next time with this car. Anyway, till next time, next thing around, maybe the axles, who knows. Talk to you later. It's important to be able to stop in the rain.